I call the member for the Minister.
Thank you very much, Madam Acting Deputy Speaker, and I want to follow on from the remarks made by the member for Berowra and note the fact that across the Parliament there has been unanimous respect and acknowledgement of the contribution that was made by Lionel Bowen. And as the member for Kingsford Smith, who now serves in a seat that Lionel Bowen won after his term of time both in local and state politics, it's a very great privilege for me to be standing here with Lionel Bowen as one of my predecessors, and it's also a great privilege for me to be able to reflect on the contribution that he's made, not only in the Parliament, but also in the electorate more broadly. It is the case that Lionel Bowen's career is a highly distinguished one that is even the more remarkable given the humble conditions and circumstances which he grew up under. And it is appropriate for me to note again just some of those achievements of high office. Deputy Prime Minister from 1983 to 1990, Attorney General for a significant period of time, Minister assisting the Prime Minister for Commonwealth State Relations, Minister for Trade, Deputy Leader of the Opposition, Special Minister of State and Minister assisting the Prime Minister, the Postmaster General, I think his first appointment under the Whitlam government, State Member for Randwick for a number of years, an Alderman on the Randwick City Council and the first Labor Alderman on the Randwick City Council as well, and of course a founding director of the Randwick Labor Club too. His achievements are noted, they are recognised as being the mark of someone who had tremendous capacity and who gave himself to the service both of the party, the Labor Party, and also of the country. I also want to reflect on some of the remarks that have been made by those people who worked with Lionel Bowen in his time. Bob Hawke, the former Prime Minister, said from his own intrinsic talents and characteristics emerged this remarkable man who now together we remember and we honour. Former Prime Minister Keating, Paul Keating, Australia has been fortunate in having the conscientious service of someone so committed to the values of justice and equity and the public good in general. Humility was written all over his calling card. I note the remarks of John O. Johnson, who has been a long-time loyal servant of the Labor Party, when he remarked of Lionel Bowen, whom he knew very well, that office meant nothing to him unless he could serve people. I think it's also the case that the qualities that Lionel Bowen displayed, qualities both of humility and capacity, are rare. They're rare in this place, I think, to be frank, and they're also rare in life in general. Here was somebody who was sure of himself, but had a down-to-earth nature that not only was noted on by his colleagues and his contemporaries, but was something which is always reflected upon by anybody who you meet, as I do as the local member now in Kingsford Smith, who met him on any occasion. He was someone that they could relate to, who they felt connected with them and listened to them, who was able to empathise with them, and I'll go on to say why I think that was the case, but who also had something to offer them by way of observation, assistance if they were a constituent seeking help, analysis from someone who was extremely capable and had considerable intellectual abilities. I think one of the keys to understanding someone's career and their character is to look to their early life, and in the case of Lionel Bowen, there's much that instructs us there. He certainly was born in what we'd now describe as fairly challenging circumstances. He was an only child and ultimately the only child of a single mum. He left school at 14 to support the family, and then worked his way over time both to become a solicitor and then ultimately a politician serving his local community for generations and generations. He's diagnosed with rheumatic fever at an early age, and I think it's probably fair to say that this would have had some influence on him as a young man. He trained as an artillery signalman, but then was taken out of active service because of that condition, and so ended up in the war working as an orderly at Sydney Hospital, unloading the wounded off the ships. Here again, an experience that I know from what his family have communicated to us had some impact on him. So he's a child of the Depression, but also in his adolescent and then early teen and late teen and early 20 years, a child of the World War II generation as well, and that certainly left its mark upon him. The Bowen family are very well known in the electorate of Kingsford Smith, and to Lionel's wife Claire and to the children and grandchildren, I again extend my warmest sympathies to them at the loss of Lionel. There's no doubt that they were aware of the tremendous capacity and characters that Lionel had, but I think it would have come home to them even more vividly when we all gathered, a number of us here, along with former Prime Ministers, at St Mary's Cathedral for the state funeral. And so the recognition was appropriately given of the contribution that he had made. Lionel, as his son Tony remarked to me, died in his favourite season, Easter, a time which reflected his religious adherence. Easter, a time when his great pursuit of the track is also starting to gear up into full swing at the racing carnival. But I think in reflecting on somebody who grew up in the circumstances that Lionel Bowen did, who ended up living as a married man in his house in Kensington with some 10 people in a 3-bedroom house for a number of years until the extension to the house in Kensington was added, I think, in 1974, and who, in his period of time, played the role in the Labor Party of being a constant, loyal, diligent and active participation in both the political affairs of the party and subsequently of the nation at their highest level. There are some aspects of Bowen's career that haven't been remarked on up to now, and I'd like to pay brief tribute to those. And I think one is the fact that he was very active in his early period in the Parliament on issues concerning Cambodia and the subsequent progress of the Cambodian nation following the terrible reign of the Khmer Rouge. Members opposite may recall some of this involvement. He was, I think, probably the first federal politician to suggest that a peacekeeping force be sent to Cambodia, something which at the time was looked at somewhat askance. And yet it was an example of how he was identifying with the people in that country who had suffered such a great deal. Lionel Bowen was someone who was both humble and confident. He was a very acute assessor of people's characters, and he served as a deputy to Prime Minister Hawke and to Prime Ministers in a way such as gave them the opportunity to lead to the fullest of their abilities, and that was truly a mark of his service here in the Parliament and to the Labor Party. I want to make one personal reflection, as it's, I think, appropriate to do that in this condolence motion, and that is to say that my first interaction with Lionel Bowen was when he approached me, when he was Attorney General, to sit on his constitutional convention, the 1988 Constitutional Convention, which I thought did some very good work, but ultimately we weren't able to settle those issues, which were and remain very important to Australians. It was always a mystery to me as to why Lionel Bowen had approached me, and I've subsequently found out that a couple of his sons, but particularly Peter and also Tony, and I think the other kids, had listened to a lot of Midnight Oil in this house in Kensington over the years, and eventually it seemed as though Lionel's ears were pricked up as well. I have to say that when I came into the party and the parliament, I was welcomed by both the Bowen family and by Lionel. He was there to provide sage advice, and it certainly was sage advice, and I was extremely appreciative of the relationship that I was able to develop with him, even though I didn't know him as well as many others. He made an extraordinary contribution to his community, to the Labor Party and to this Labor governments that he served, and he made an extraordinary contribution to the nation. He will be very well remembered.